All right, welcome back to another episode of Creedal Catholic. If you're listening to this on a podcast, you can also watch this online, or at least I think you can, if all goes well with the video editing.
Revolutionary.
Then my listeners will be able to watch it online. This is kind of a trial run, so we've never done a video episode before for Creedal Catholic, but I'm trying to this time, and to help me pilot this, to be my guinea pig, brought on my good friend Mike Iversen to talk to me about a bunch of things today. We're going to cover the easy stuff, Mike, so pipe smoking to start out with. Okay, yep. That's an easy warm-up softball for you.
We can do that.
I'm just going to lob it up for you. And then I think maybe political polarization.
Okay.
Conspiracy theories.
Good.
How to be a Catholic in contemporary America.
Okay.
Like I said, the easy stuff.
This should be about 10, 15 minutes max.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nothing to it. So let's start with the pipe smoking though, Mike.
Yeah,
so I think I mentioned this last time Mike was on the podcast with me, but Mike has been my pipe sensei. I only recently started smoking a pipe. It was just last summer. Mm-hmm. And I had heard from somebody in the parish, because we're sitting in our parish's studio. So thank you to Holy Apostles Catholic Church. We're in the Blessed Carlo Acutis film studio.
Yes.
So thanks to Holy Apostles for letting us use the studio, borrow the equipment, etc. But someone in my parish told me Mike Iversen was a pipe smoker. And I thought, I need to talk to Mike about how he does that. How do I get started with a pipe? I mean, do I go on Amazon and buy a pipe? How do I know what kind of tobacco to get, etc.? So I heard Mike was the guy, and indeed Mike was. Mike had me over to his house, and there you showed me your collection of about 100 different pipes, I think, more or less.
Ish. More than 15, probably less than 100.
Okay, more than, a substantial number. 80-ish, yeah. One for every week of the year and then some.
Yeah, one for every day of every quarter.
Every day of every, perfect. And so you showed me all that. You walked me through kind of what I should look for in a pipe. And then you have, 50 different kinds of tobacco as well. So let me sample some of that. It was great fun. And like I said, my pipe sensei. So Mike, talk to me about pipe smoking. First of all, why should we smoke a pipe?
So I'll answer that kind of in a narrative form.
Oh, great! I love story time.
I started smoking a pipe really when I was in seminary, because I needed some sort of contemplative, easily portable way to unwind and to think. And pipe smoking, I don't think that it's coincidental that these great minds of the 20th century, like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, G.K. Chesterton, they were pipe smokers, because when you smoke a pipe, it's kind of it's this mindful, peaceful exercise where you've constantly got to be doing something, but even the very to get the best flavor out of the pipe tobacco, you actually you regulate your breathing. So it's kind of this quasi-Zen experience where you're regulating your breathing, and you're focusing not on the smoking of the pipe, but it is something that you have to keep maintaining. You have to fiddle with it. You have to. It's kind of like the equivalent of fly fishing to me.
Now, I had never smoked a pipe, like I said before you introduced it to me, but I had smoked a cigarette in college. I mean, I tried one cigarette and never again. It was horrible. But this is very different from cigarette smoking.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's obviously the inhaling, not inhaling, but I just mean even in the sort of the rhythm of how you do it. With a cigarette, you take a big inhale, full drag, big exhale. And with pipe, it's more of a sort of a maintenance puff. And of course, there's no inhalation as well.
Right, exactly.
So much more contemplative,
Absolutely, yeah. And I would contend that the best way to smoke a pipe is what's called breath smoking, where you're actually breathing through your nose while the pipe is in your mouth. And just the suction that naturally occurs while you're breathing through your nose draws a little bit of smoke in, just kind of a trickle, and you get the best flavor from the tobacco.
That is an advanced maneuver, though.
That is an advanced maneuver.
I'm still working on my breath smoking.
Well, and to your original point, I would say if you want to start, if it's something that you're thinking about, I mean, not like it's not a health move, maybe not a New Year's resolution to start smoking a pipe, but it actually has been shown that pipe smoking, because it's such a great stress reducer, that the health benefits may even outweigh, if not they kind of negate the health detriments because of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that comes up, I think, a lot with pipe smoking, right? And when I first started pipe smoking, and I don't do it a ton, I do it socially, right? I primarily smoke with you, Mike, but when I first started doing it, some people said, like, hey, you really should reconsider this hobby because, X and X studies say that there's a linkage between smoking and cancer. And that's certainly true. I mean, we can say a couple things, though. you don't inhale with the pipe, right? So you're not breathing all this smoke, all this carcinogenic material into your lungs, which is good.
Right.
But two, I mean, most people find it relaxing. And so, I mean, talk to anybody who knows anything about mental health and they'll say that like mindfulness and relaxation is really important. And if pipes help you do that, then that's a plus in the pro side. So there's it's relaxing, and there's also the fact that if you do it socially, you're around people, you're around friends, and we're social animals, as Aristotle would say.
Absolutely.
And we know as Catholics that we should be around each other too. So Mike and I have found it a great exercise just to get together and talk about theology or things in the church, et cetera. And it's been a really good activity.
Yeah.
So where to go?
Yeah. So
how do you start it?
So if you want to start, don't just choose a random pipe off of Amazon or eBay or whatever. Most of those actually, so pipes are typically made out of one of three materials. Decent pipes are made out of one of three materials. Either a corn cob, which is actually
the classic,
the classic Huck Finn move. Secondly, there's a substance called meerschaum, which is basically a type of, almost like a type of like between limestone and chalk that's found mainly in Turkey.
Yeah. So it's like lightweight, right?
Yeah, super absorbent, lightweight mineral. And
that shatters also, doesn't it?
Isn't if you drop it, it's pretty fragile. Okay. So meerschaums they tend to be a little bit more expensive, but they also, when meerschaum is soaked in water, they're easily carved. So a lot of times you get these really ornate carved meerschaum pipes, but they tend to be expensive and they're not as practical as the third option, which is briar. And briar is actually the root ball of a Mediterranean heath bush, almost like a small tree. And they found in the 1860s, I believe, that it was super durable, very dense, still reasonably lightweight, and it doesn't burn. So it's kind of this ideal medium for, and it's non-toxic, and it's, which is always good.
It's a solid thing.
So it's this ideal medium for smoking tobacco in. So you need a briar pipe. That would be my recommendation first. If you go to a number of these different retailers on like Amazon, for example, they're not going to be briar pipes. A lot of those are actually made in China, and there's some sort of undetermined plastoid material.
So a non-flammable plastic, basically.
And then a lot of times they have a little metal bowl on the inside, so they don't even look like a tobacco pipe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So don't do that. Go to a reputable tobacconist, or there's a number of quality online retailers as well. But get a briar pipe, and then tobacco choices. I mean, there's got to be 4,000 different varieties of tobacco, but they kind of fall into one of three or four different categories. And I would recommend getting something that is either an English or an Oriental blend, or a Burley blend to begin with. Kind of the
more than an aromatic, then.
More than an aromatic.
Aromatics, they'll smell nice, but they'll burn a little bit less pleasantly.
They smell great, but the reason they smell great is because they're cased in a whole bunch of sugar water, and sugar water, as we know, burns really hot and kind of acrid. So aromatics, while they may smell like creme brulee or whatever, they tend to be really hot.
The pumpkin pie tobacco.
Yeah, right. But they create a lot of steam and they actually burn your tongue.
Okay.
So it's a bad thing to begin learning with. So generally a mildly flavored Burley or an English or an Oriental tobacco is the way to go.
Yeah. So my one recommendation, I mean, there's the website smokingpipes.com, I think. They have a lot of good stuff. But my number one recommendation is to find a friend who knows all about pipes, and then you can ask all your questions. I mean, before I bought my pipe, I sent it to Mike and I was like, "Hey, Mike, what's this one look like?" And he was like, "Well, it's a pretty good buy for these reasons. You might find that it gurgles a little bit," but I was like, "Okay, well, much more info than I ever could have had." So
and that was my journey into pipe smoking as well, because I tried it before and didn't find it enjoyable because I just wasn't doing it right. But there was a guy at a tobacconist in Las Cruces, New Mexico, who just knew his pipe smoking.
Okay.
A guy named Lou, and he taught me kind of what to look for.
The shop owner?
Shop owner.
You told me about him.
Yeah, I just used to go hang out with him in a hotel, actually. It's this little maybe 20 by 20 walk-in closet sized tobacconist in a hotel in Las Cruces. But this guy's just a wealth of knowledge. So
That's cool.
I found it ununenjoyable and unrelaxing, and then immediately once I started following his advice, started finding it relaxing and enjoyable.
Yeah.
So that was 15 years ago or so.
Your story about briar makes me wonder, like, how many people had to try all these bad different types of wood before they were like, "Ooh, that doesn't work for pipes, and that doesn't work for pipes." Yeah. There's this comedian who told a story. It wasn't a story. He was just saying, like, I wonder how people discovered cheese, because like you have yolk, you have milk, right? And like milk goes bad, and it's dangerous,
right?
And then it gets worse, and it's like yogurt, and then it gets really bad, and by bad I just mean like expired, long
Right.
past it, and it's cheese. So
which,
like, how do you get to the point where like, no, we just kept eating it day after day? Eventually it was yogurt, and then we kept going, and eventually it was cheese.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
who discovers that? That's,
I'm sure the same thing happened with the tobacco. Pipe.
Finally the guy who tried Dreher and was like, guys, I found it.
Yeah, this
Dreher is the stuff.
This is it.
Pine is, throw those
Pine's
pipes
not
out.
good.
Throw those oak pipes out.
There are a few fruit wood pipes that are also okay. Particularly pear wood.
Pear wood.
Like
the pear tree.
the pear tree. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's non-toxic. It's edible.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Non-toxic is solid.
Non-toxic
as
is
we've established.
Far better than toxic. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, enough about pipe smoking. If you want to check it out, I mean, find a friend. Check out smokingpipes.com too, and there are plenty of articles on there too.
Absolutely. They have a daily blog, like a reader that you can learn even rudimentarily how to smoke a pipe from their website.
Not sponsored at all. We just like pipe smoking.
But we would be open to it.
Hey, yeah. Contact us. All right. So, Mike, you and I both had some conversations recently in which people have talked to us about how they're thinking more about what it means to be a Catholic today specifically.
Yeah.
Right. So we understand what it means to be a Catholic, to follow the moral law, to be a faithful son or daughter of the church. But in our moment right now, and granted, this is not the same for everyone across the world, but in our moment right now in America, we find ourselves in a very interesting situation.
Right.
In that we have what some have described, and I'm thinking of Rod Dreher in this book that we both read recently. Yeah. Some have described it as a soft totalitarianism that is seeking total conformity to a pretty radical ideology that is anti-Christian in many respects.
Right.
We have increasing political polarization across the board. It's not a one-sided problem. Both sides increasingly hate each other and have no common ground with one another. And then maybe the third piece that I would say that's certainly related to those two is the power of narrative. And I've been thinking, especially over the last few months, throughout all of COVID really, about how powerful it is to control the levers of information in a society.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly why any authoritarian state goes after those levers first and foremost, because he who controls the information controls thought. So we find ourselves in this sort of confluence of factors, and they're all arriving in this really grand moment. Yeah. Some people are really scared. I think the first thing we can say is you shouldn't be scared. Right?
Absolutely.
We know that Jesus Christ is king.
Yeah, God has not left his throne. Regardless of the political situation, regardless of who's storming what public buildings, etc., God is still in control.
Exactly. So that's not a good response. But I think it is good to be thoughtful about this and to think, how can we be better Christians in this moment, amidst all the challenges that I just outlined, amidst all the turmoil in these times that we find ourselves. I also don't want this to come across as saying Biden won the election, therefore we find ourselves in this moment.
Yeah, no.
This is a sort of this is a pre-Trump problem.
Absolutely.
This is not a Trump problem or a Biden problem. And cards on the table, I personally am glad that Trump lost the election because I think he's a buffoon, and I think he is not helpful for our civic discourse, et cetera. I also didn't vote for Biden. I've been upfront on this show before about how I voted third party, et cetera. But this is not a Trump lost, oh no situation, nor is this a Biden won, oh no situation. This is us just looking at what's going on, realizing that everyone in this country hates everyone on the other side of the political aisle, realizing that everyone in this country is glued to their smartphones and their devices and self-select their own means of information consumption. And that's a problem. And it's a real problem, I think, for Catholics. It presents problems for how we think about our engagement with the world, how we live out our faith. And maybe most importantly, it affects how we evangelize and think about engaging our neighbor with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we can just solve a few of these problems today, Mike. Simple stuff. But maybe start with a simple question for you. So I know you recently read this book, Live Not by Lies, by Rod Dreher, who is a former Catholic, now Orthodox. His thesis is that we are consuming, we've tethered ourselves so much to sort of corporate ideology through things like social media, our smartphones, just the technology that makes us comfortable every day. And we are becoming increasingly beholden to these overlords who demand total fealty to their ideology. So maybe as a starting point, what do you think of the book? And do you think the thesis holds up?
Yeah, I do think the thesis holds up. And I enjoyed the book. I honestly, no offense to Mr. Dreher, but could have been a little shorter. But I really liked how he How he tells the stories. He kind of puts on all these multifaceted narratives of folks who lived through totalitarian regimes, particularly in the former Soviet Union, and how they not only survived but thrived within that totalitarian regime. So first off, he kind of tells us about how these people, what these people saw, what these people experienced in their lives in this totalitarian regime, and then their warnings to us in America with this impending or already present but not fully realized totalitarian regime that's a soft totalitarian regime that we live in. And then he basically tells us what to do about it. So I think it's a quality book. It's practical. It gives hope, I think, most importantly, that everything isn't just going to hell, literally. Instead, there is hope. We do have responsibility, though, within that and within this system to live differently. And as the title implies, to live not by lies. So if we're being fed the party line or the socioeconomic reality that's being fabricated by some huge corporation, for example, that's a lie. And we need to realize that, and then we need to act accordingly. So I did think that was really very good.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about the soft versus hard totalitarianism, because I do think that there are ways to sort of overreact to what's going on now, right? And so we were having a discussion the other night in which we were talking about Emperor Nero and how St. Paul is writing his letter to the Romans, his epistle to the Romans, and he's saying, submit to those who are in authority over you. And he's doing that at a time when Nero is the emperor, one of the most anti-Christian figures in all of history, so much so that people at the time thought he may be the Antichrist talked about in the book of Revelation, right? And so we've been here before, right? We've been in bad situations before where we've been in very anti-Christian societies. So I don't think we need to have an overreactive panic to this moment. But I do think, and I think to go along with that, we're also not in a hard totalitarian regime like the Soviet Union, where we're not allowed to go to mass, for example. Just because we have no freedom of religion. We do have freedom of religion. I think there are encroachments on that, certainly, and we should talk about those and be prepared to engage with those. But the soft totalitarianism piece is about how this is not an authoritarian decree from a centralized ruler, but rather a sort of collective movement that is primarily driven by corporate interests, in some cases political interests, but it's primarily about ideology. And it's soft because it's comfortable and it sort of slips in. So rather than someone coming in and saying, you will conform, period, or you will be executed, a soft totalitarianism says, it basically says the price of admission here, the price of being in our social media network, the price of shopping at our store, the price of working at our company is that you conform to these principles. And I think sometimes we can go a little bit too far even here and just think, how can I work at a company that says this, et cetera? And we sometimes overreact, I think, to things that we shouldn't overreact to. We can be a witness in a company that is not that is not familiar with the gospel, and that's a really good thing, a really good mission field to see. But sometimes the rubber hits the road, the expression I'm looking for. And I'm thinking here of like sending your kid to school and having your kid be indoctrinated with really dangerous gender ideology when your kid is 7 or 8 years old, right? That's a dangerous thing.
Absolutely.
And so there are already moments where Catholics are having to make choices in America and to a large extent in the entire Western world that bring these questions to the forefront. So I guess, Mike, what I would ask you, you're someone who has kids who are older. Maybe you've been through some of these decisions already. You've tackled them. So what would you have to say, or what do you have to say to Catholics about sort of evaluating these challenges, these decisions that you have to make in a soft totalitarianism?
Yeah. Well, I would contend that we need to be in the world but not of the world, right? If we just remove ourselves, if we do truly the Benedict option, as Dreher said in his first book, I think we lose a lot of our ability to be good witnesses and to, as you alluded to, be that light in a corporation that is anti-Christian or unchristian. I think the same thing goes with our kids in school. And Kate and I have some great friends in Western Washington that have They have 7 biological kids, and then they adopted another 6.
Wow.
So 13 kids.
Cheaper by the baker's dozen. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's why they stopped, because they ran out of colloquialisms to count them with.
Right.
But they sent all their kids through public school, and they're all very devout, committed Christian kids. Some of them are collegiate athletes. They're just solid kids. And they actually wrote a book on why they did that, and it was about this. It was this very question, but it was 15 years ago that they wrote the book, and it all really revolves around us as a family unit and us as a committed, caring Catholic entity at our parish, at the parish level, at the family level, being this place of solace, being this place of refuge that our kids can come back to, and even in the midst of being indoctrinated or attempting, the school or the administration is attempting to indoctrinate them, you come back home and you have these discussions around the dinner table of, no, that isn't right. And here's why, because it's in conflict or it's in direct opposition to God's law and to natural law and to things that are, quite frankly, just sensible, even in addition to our faith, right? So I think the key there is not the physical location or the extrication from the system, but rather that we have a stronger, better, more reliable, faith-filled, true system that we're constantly exhorting our kids to follow. Really.
Yeah. There's a couple things there. I mean, I think the first thing is, remember, the family is the domestic church, and parents have a responsibility to nurture their children in the faith. Right. So even if you send your kids to school or you send your kids to catechesis for First Communion, right?
Or a like parish school.
Yeah, right? And we've talked about this before when you were on the podcast previously, right? Mike's the director of religious education. I guess I probably should have given the introduction for those who don't know you, but Mike's the director of evangelization and discipleship at our parish here, which is essentially a DRE function with some additional duties. And I think your scope is a little bit broader on the whole sort of faith formation front. But as the director of evangelization and discipleship, Mike has seen, and we've talked about this before, a lot of people who want to just drop their kids off at school, certainly at school, but drop their kids off for faith formation on Sundays, or think that it's the parish's job to prepare their kid for First Communion. Right. No, absolutely not. I mean, what the parish programs, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of the parish programs is that they are designed to make sure that there's sort of a lowest common denominator, right? So to catch those who don't have good family formation in place, et cetera.
And then also to train and equip and provide the necessary tools to the parents to be those.
Well, and that's what you've tried to institute here, right? Absolutely. So it's not just a program for kids; it's also a program for parents, right?
So if your kids are in class, the parents are in class,
right? But that's why you've made that that way, right? Because parents need to remember it's their job as well. So this family that you were just talking about in Washington, I think they did a good job remembering that it's our job to educate. Right. The school is helping us, right? And so I think that's maybe the first one to think about there. And the second one, you also talked about this. There is no higher law than God's law.
Absolutely.
And part of forming your children is to help them understand this and remember this and be able to call upon it. And I think one thing that I've seen already in my parenting journey, which is a lot shorter than Mike's, my oldest is 6, but one thing I've seen already is that we can never be afraid of answering hard questions or even asking hard questions, right?
Well, and bringing them up of our own accord, honestly, I think is I think more than just being reactionary or reactive, we need to preempt with our kids.
Because there's nothing more frustrating to me than reading yet another story about a prominent Christian, maybe a singer, songwriter, or something, who becomes a high functioning agnostic because they started asking questions that they could have asked a long time ago, or really someone should have asked for them and then taught them about, And so as Catholics, we need to take, especially as Catholic parents, as Catholic adults, we need to take responsibility for asking those questions ourselves so that when our kids ask them, we have answers, or so that we can help our kids think about them and anticipate them before they even get to the point where they would naturally occur. I mean, there are really, really smart people who have been Catholics, and we have no reason to fear being exposed as liars and charlatans because something's not true.
Right.
And so I guarantee you, if there's a question that you're struggling with, someone else in the church has already struggled with it. And some father of the church has probably written a thesis on it,
Yeah, probably.
And so I think that's a really important thing. I don't want to go too long here, Mike, especially since this is a trial run of the studio here and everything. So let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
We've also had some conversations with people about conspiracy theories. Yeah. And this has really come to the forefront in the past week and a half or so because of the Capitol occupation, invasion, riot, whatever you want to call it. And just to kind of wrap up the story in a 30-second narrative here, the election is November 3rd, I think, right? Post-election, Trump motivates his base and says this was a fraudulent election, lots of irregularities at the state level, et cetera. Right. A chorus of lawsuits follow suit, none of which materialize into anything. The states all certify the election results. All the while, Trump kind of keeps fomenting his base with these stories and sort of narratives about the election being stolen and fraudulent. And that culminates in what was it called? The Justice Day or whatever the march was.
Yeah, I don't remember the official title.
Whatever the march was on January 6th, right? That was the day that Congress was going to accept the state certified results for the election, officially making Biden the president-elect. And the march went towards the Capitol, and unlike stopping at the Capitol steps, or even I think some marches have gone into the Capitol and sort of peacefully stood around with protests, this ended with one Capitol police officer being killed by rioters, one rioter being shot by Capitol Police as she was trying to enter a chamber. I don't know if it was the House chamber or what, somewhere in the Capitol.
And subsequently died.
Died, yes, exactly. And I think 3 others died. It's unclear exactly how they did. But what was clear to me, I mean, I had a lot of questions after this event, but one of the things that was clear to me is that these people, as guilty as they are for doing what they did and trespassing in the Capitol and beating up a police officer, et cetera, and they should be punished to the full extent of the law. I was also reading up on some of these people, and some of them were genuinely surprised that things worked out the way they did, that the march failed, that Trump didn't come in and save them, that there was no larger scale kind of coup effort underway, et cetera. And that underscored to me that these people, in many ways, are victims of false narration, right? Where they believe something and they've so internally consumed this that they really can't develop another way of seeing reality. Now, narratives, of course, are not a bad thing because we, as Catholics, hold to a narrative, right? It's the meta-narrative of salvation history. It's the narrative. It is literally his story, right? It's the story of God's plan for mankind. So narratives certainly aren't the problem. But I've been thinking about who controls the narratives are the problem, and what the narrative is it can certainly be a problem. And I'm highlighting one side of the political the political divide right now, the I guess extreme right. But you'll find narratives across the spectrum, and I think certainly the fringe narratives contain the least elements of truth that are out there. But I've been thinking about this a lot because I've also seen Catholics, and we've talked about this before as well. I've seen Catholics become ready consumers of conspiracy theories.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I was going to pick your brain on why that is. I have a few ideas about why that might be, but why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's kind of 2 answers to that question. I think the first is the intentionally pure. I think it's a pseudo morality where folks legitimately want what's best for, in this case, for the nation or for their families or for what have you. Whatever whatever they care about. They're then motivated to believe this conspiracy theory because it bolsters and helps to rectify these wrongs that have been done. So, like the Stop the Steal movement. People really wanted Trump to be reelected because they believe that he is our only hope. He's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Help me, you're our only hope. So they believe that without him, or if Biden gets elected, which he did, that there is no hope. So it's a morally sound effort that they're going into believing these conspiracy theories, but it's flawed in that the facts aren't there. So I think that's the best case scenario, is that folks are truly concerned, they really want what's best, and then they're buying into these narratives, these false narratives that are telling them that what is best really did happen. It's just been veiled. So I think that's kind of the first the innocent and the rightly motivated, if not rightly executed, conspiracy theory belief. I think the other one is just asinine, where folks are making up things like no human being should, every human being should be gluten-free vegan, or the moon landing never happened, or the Earth is flat,
or alien stuff,
or there's lizard people, that live under New Mexico that can actually control the world.
I mean, you lived in New Mexico. You probably knew a few of the lizard people.
I knew a guy who was all about the lizard people, and actually was scared of the lizard people and drove around with a gun strapped to them
too. If I believed they were real, I'd be scared of them.
Oh yeah. I mean, this guy was strapped in his pickup truck because he was ready for the lizard people.
It's like Mad Max Fury Road
or something. It was basically like that, only in a Dodge truck, and it wasn't tricked out. But I think that is just people who have ill intent preying upon people's desires to have this secret knowledge. I think it comes back to gnosis, to like Gnosticism. It's all this neo-Gnosticism where knowledge is power, and the perception of knowledge, even if that knowledge is false, creates a false perception of power. And we all want that. We all want to be significant. So if I know something that you don't know, that gives me an edge over you. So I think there's a lot of people with ill intent that are trying to lead people astray intentionally in order to gain power of their own.
No, I like that. So I like your first point about moral purity. I hadn't thought as much about that. I was thinking more along the lines of the second point. And I think Catholics sometimes are particularly susceptible to this because Christians in general, I think, are susceptible to gnosis.
Absolutely.
To thinking this or to adhering to a Gnostic idea. And by Gnosticism is still still persistent today. There's a neo-Gnosticism that's rampant, I think, in the church and in broader society, certainly. But early on, the Gnostics held that there was some sort of hidden knowledge. And normally they would make some seriously erroneous claims about the nature of Christ, and they would do so, or the person of Christ, person of Jesus Christ, and they would do so because they were saying we have this hidden knowledge that not all of you have. So this has been a persistent problem, but I think your point about Gnosticism is really good because I think conspiracy theories can sometimes be really attractive to Catholics, to people of faith perhaps in general, because we already accept that we hold truths to be true that many others don't. So there's already an implicit claim that we believe something that they don't.
We have a predisposition toward that.
And now, of course, that belief can lead us to a moral purity, which is wrong. We're not better because we believe that, but it's certainly good that we recognize that we are saved by and through Jesus Christ. So I think that's maybe the first part, and then the second part is linked to your moral purity part. There's always an impulse or a desire to refine and purify the church. So there are a lot of well-intentioned Catholics, and you and I know some of them, who really want to purify the church and have a very holy desire to do that, but they end up being led astray because they end up sort of grappling onto conspiracy theories that probably don't sound so outlandish to them because we already accept things like the existence of angels, we accept that God, who created the entire universe, became man and inhabited flesh and lived among us and then died on a cross. And when he did so, he carried our sins to the grave with him. But then, by the way, 3 days later, he rose again, So, if you're saying that you already believe that, then believing that there's a deep state conspiracy in the United States all of a sudden doesn't seem that outlandish, But I think the difference is, there are many differences, I think. But one distinction between those two things, or one reason why Catholics really need to be careful, is that we often base our beliefs about conspiracy theories on this sort of Gnostic idea about humanity, So rather than believing things about God that have been revealed to us in divine revelation, we believe things that are revealed to us on Twitter or on Parler or social media or whatever the case is, or from our friends, And these things are never divine revelation. These things are things told to us by other humans about this secretive cabal of other humans who are doing this nefarious thing. Now, it's certainly true that humans are nefarious, and another thing that Catholics know is that every human is sinful. And so there's an element of us that needs to healthfully, is that a word? Healthily recognize that people do bad things. And there have been conspiracies, of course. It's not that conspiracies don't exist. But we also need to recognize that God reigns sovereign and that God has instituted governments over us to do things and to give us political order. And so there's a tension that the Catholic, I think, has to hold between thinking that the government is out to kill you, or the lizard people are out to kill you, and that the government is our savior.
Right.
Because those two things are diametrically opposed to each other, and the Catholic can believe neither, right? They can't believe the first because they have to recognize, as St. Paul says, that God has instituted those in authority. And they can't believe the second because they have to believe, as all of Scripture and salvation history tells us, that mankind is sinful.
Right.
So how can we place our entire faith in a man-made institution? But I think that tension and sort of where you are on that continuum is an important thing.
Absolutely, and I would contend that tension, being a Christian, being a faithful Catholic, really is living a life of being in tension between two extremes.
Yeah, very true.
And I think we shift in the exact placement of where we are in that place of tension between those poles with current events and with new legitimate revelation of election scandals or whatever the case may be, but. Again, God has not left his throne. Yeah. And to your point about human sinfulness, and just, I would contend that we're all looking to follow God better. That's ultimately our ultimate desire as Catholics, is to follow God more. But the difficulty is when those sources, when those means that you trust, mind you, are leading you astray.
Right, for sure.
And I've had conversations with deeply committed, deeply devout Catholics, using some sort of internet resource that they trust to prove that this or another conspiracy theory is true.
Right.
And then if one posits some sort of contrary information, I've literally had a guy say to me, "Well, you got that off the internet." So that can't be valid. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you got yours off the internet too. It was just from somebody you trusted. And now I don't have a trustworthy source, but it's from the same, greater cesspool of information. And again, that I think the original intent is good there, but we become so polarized, and polarizing ourselves against other Catholics, against other Christians, and against what is good is exactly what Satan wants us to do. It does nothing. It is absolutely nothing. There's nothing. It has nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus' great prayer of unity is that love each other so that the world may know who you are. And Father, as you and I are one, so may they be one. Not so may they be divisive and hate each other over election results. Yeah,
that's such a good point. And I think on that point of unity, we have to remember that you can't have unity without truth, right? I mean, you just repeated part of Jesus' high priestly prayer, love one another, that you may be one, or I'm praying that you may be one. Right. And those two ideas are very linked, right? Loving one another and remaining one in Christ are linked ideas because love is truth, right? Just like Benedict XVI's Caritas and Veritate. He elaborates on this scriptural idea very well in saying that you can't have love without truth. And love, in fact, is truth, right? There's nothing truer than love. And you can't have unity without love. You can't have unity without truth. So I think that idea is really important. I also think Catholics sometimes tend to elevate certain aspects of, and this goes, I think, to your moral purity idea. So it doesn't have to do necessarily with the personal moral purity, but it has to do with a sort of a preconceived vision of how the world has to be, right? The world has to be a place in which there are no abortion clinics, right? The world has to be a place in which there is no divorce, right? Now, a perfect world is a place where there are no abortion clinics and there is no divorce. Absolutely. But that is not the world that God has allowed to be right now, right? And so I think sometimes we end up equating these two ideas, right? We end up thinking that because the world is disordered and we see that it is not yet heaven, that there is this giant conspiracy afoot, and it's our job to undo it, right? And whoever sort of promises to undo that conspiracy for us that's going to be my guy, right? Yeah. And I think that's a really dangerous idea for a whole host of reasons, right? But one of the foremost is that kind of person is the kind of person who can get suckered into supporting somebody or some idea that they really have no business supporting in the first place. Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of the Antichrist, right? This guy or this person, this entity that we put our hope in, who is not God. Yeah. Regardless of
whether you think that's an individual at some point in the future, or it's an individual at some point in the past, or if it's an ideology, whatever the case may be.
Several individuals, yeah. Have you read the Father Elijah series by Michael D. O'Brien?
I haven't, no.
Okay. Highly recommend. These are great books. The second of them, so I think it's Sophia House, Father Elijah, and then Elijah in Jerusalem. And Michael D. O'Brien, if you're not familiar, or if listeners are not familiar, a Canadian Catholic, fantastic writer. He writes very, I would say, penetratingly. Like he's an avid student of theology, a faithful son of the church, and he writes. The purpose of literature, right, is to help us see the world as it is or as how it should be. And I think that's a great way of describing Michael D. O'Brien's work. But his Elijah series is about this priest named Father Elijah, later becomes a bishop. And in the middle series, Father Elijah is tasked with basically fighting the Antichrist, not like in physical, hand-to-hand mortal combat, but spiritually. And the Antichrist is this figure who is basically, he's a political candidate, and he is, actually I think he's beyond candidate, I think he's actually holding political office, but he's basically the head of the European Union, if the European Union were not just a sort of economic bloc. So imagine like the United States of Europe almost, and he becomes the head of that organization and is clearly moving towards being the head of the world, right? But the idea is, so many people have followed this guy's meteoric rise, and they have planted their flag alongside him or grabbed onto his coattails, whatever analogy you want to use, but they have done so. And despite the fact that he says all the right things and he's just a total charmer, seems like he's just really out for the good of humanity and the good of the world, he is perversely anti-Christian because he's not placing God at the forefront. And I think that's another thing that we fall into the trap of too sometimes, is we end up wanting to grab the coattails of someone who's just, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And so because we share a common enemy in that ideology, we'll grab onto them and say, all right, let's ride or die, right? We're going to do this. And that's dangerous. I mean, to be Catholic is to be, in a sense, super political because we have to care about the world, but it's also in another sense to be apolitical because we have to have this attachment from the things of the world. It's what you were saying, be in the world but not of it, right? So we have to be simultaneously in and engaged. We also have to be removed to a certain degree. Right. And remember that our kingdom is that of Jesus Christ, who said, my kingdom is not of this world.
Right. Yeah. That brings me right back to Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies. That's who we are as Christians, is we are tasked to live not by lies and to live instead by the example, the witness, the priestly authority of Jesus Christ. And you can't do that if you're giving over your allegiance and giving over some false sense of hope into a human.
Yeah, absolutely.
It isn't compatible with who we are as Catholics.
Yeah. So as a practical point to just sort of round out what you were just saying, Mike, I think I would exhort listeners or watchers, viewers, to not engage in, if you're gonna go on Twitter, for example, right? And I get it. I have a Twitter account, right? I go on there and I digest news from there. But for every minute that you spend on Twitter, be spending a minute in prayer. Yeah. Be spending a minute at Mass. Be spending a minute saying the Rosary, praying the Angelus, 6 a.m., 12 p.m., 6 p.m. It's a great spiritual practice. Try to consciously choose to spend your time doing the things that are not of this world. And when you do pray for the world, pray for our nation, pray for your own discernment and thinking through things and sifting through information that you are reading and seeing and consuming every day. But I think that's the best thing, right? I mean, sometimes we ask these really complicated questions and we get really angsty, like, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. What am I to do? Right. And the answer sometimes is right in front of us, right? And I think in this case, it is right in front of us. There are specific and practical, nuanced answers, but at a very base level, like, we're Christians, we're Catholics. We need to be going to Mass. We need to be receiving the sacraments. We need to be spending time in prayer every single day. We need to be spreading the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's our witness, right? And not only is that for us, but that's for, as you said, that's for the whole world. That's for both the us and for the them. And pray for the them, whoever the them are to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because we want them, ultimately, we don't want them to be destroyed. That's not Christian. We want them to become us.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Spiritual discipline and spending time with the only thing that is absolutely guaranteed to be true, which is God and his church.
Beautiful. Yeah, well said. Well, that's it for this episode of Creedal Catholic. Hopefully you enjoyed either the audio or the video edition. If you have a question for Mike, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to pass it on to him, or we can have a follow-on discussion and discuss any other more advanced or complex or just totally different questions that we get out of this. So if you'd like to hear us talk about something else, I haven't talked to Mike about doing a recurring episode, but maybe. I don't know, maybe he's up for it.
I'd be. It depends on if the price is right.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds good. All right. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Credo Catholic. Reach out to me, Zach, Z-A-C, @credocatholic.com. And until next time, God bless you.